Thank you everyone for joining us for our webinar today, How to Keep Your Culture and Engagement Alive in a Work From Home Environment. My name is Allison Mitchell and I'm part of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce team. Before we start our webinar, there are a few housekeeping items that I'd like to share. Your microphones should be on mute, but if you could please double check that to ensure that we reduce background noise, that would be great. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to ask questions using the questions box in your control panel. At the end of our presentation, our presenter will be answering your questions. And following the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to today's webinar recording. Our speaker for today's webinar is Sheila Thomson. Sheila is enthusiastically and proactively engages with cross-functional teams at Axonify as a people and culture business partner. Sheila brings over 10 years experience in the human resources field across a variety of industries, including telecom, engineering, tourism, and technology. Originally from BC, she has lived and worked in 3 provinces, and her experience spans international firms, national-based companies, and local small organizations. Her passion is modernizing the human resources operation and aligning the business objectives with people objectives. She values a business culture where people want to be at work, not because they must be, and balances the exciting reality of the changing workforce with a realistic, honest, and resilient mindset. I would now like to invite Sheila to begin the presentation.
All right, well, thank you very much for that great introduction, and thank you everybody for joining for the next hour or so. I do encourage you to type your questions, your messages in the chat box throughout the presentation. I certainly do prefer an environment where we can have more of a conversation throughout this and we can all learn from each other, but obviously in virtual circumstances, it doesn't make it as easy. So please share your ideas, even if you have something that you'd like others to hear about and learn from as I'm going through the presentation. Everybody can certainly benefit from that. So today I am going to be reviewing keeping your culture and engagement alive during an unengaging circumstance, and a little bit more specifically, working in a work from home environment. Most of us have been dispersed, so that will be a bit more of my focus, but certainly a lot of the topics that I'll be reviewing today can be used in any environment as well. So for the next hour, I'm going to review a little bit about myself, just to give you some understanding of where I'm coming from and what makes some of my experiences relevant for how we're working in this new environment. I'm going to talk about the needs theory and motivation and how that impacts employee engagement, and the benefits and the importance of communication as you engage your employees. And then we'll look at a bit more of those practical ideas to engage employees based on their needs. I recognize that a lot of you are in very different circumstances. So some of you have had to make some permanent or temporary layoffs. Some of you could still be working in the front line, engaging with the public. Some of you are completely a remote workforce. So I know that where we are all coming from is unique and different, but certainly hope that what you can learn about today, you can take back to your workforce and start to think more about how to engage your employees with a new perspective and some new ideas. So the focus of this will be mostly geared towards those that have had a shift of their business to being more remote. But again, you can use these in all circumstances. So a little bit about me, as in the nice introduction. I did grow up, I was born and raised in Victoria, BC, which is certainly a lovely part of our country. And if you haven't been there, then of course, being from that area, I would encourage all of you to try and venture out as soon as it's open for all of us to travel across the country. But while I was in Victoria, I attended college there, and I worked in finance and accounting-based industries. And I realized that I wanted to pursue more business-related fields. So I wanted to relocate and find a different city that had more thriving business focus. So that is when I relocated myself to to Alberta, and I lived in Calgary for a number of years. That's where I completed my Bachelor of Commerce with a focus in human resources. And there I worked in the tourism industry, which generally you don't think of Calgary as a tourist destination, but I worked at a small amusement park in human resources. It's called Callaway Park, much smaller version of Wonderland. I worked there for a number of years, and then I worked in telecom for a number of years as well. And what was interesting about working in Calgary was that it really taught me the implications of employee engagement and how that can shift significantly when the economy changes. And Calgary, being in the oil and gas industry, sees a lot of those very highs and those very lows. So it gave me that exposure to how to engage employees as we saw those shifts in the economy. After being in Calgary for a number of years, I met my husband there, and we decided that when it was time to start a family, we wanted to relocate again. So we actually moved at that point to Ontario. So I left the Calgary area, off to Ontario, and we lived in a small town called Thornbury for a number of years. Thornbury was great, certainly a shift in the size and the industry again. So I worked in human resources at Blue Mountain for a period of time. And that again was quite a shift in how to motivate and engage employees based on the workforce, based on the seasonal nature of the industry as well. So after 8 years of being in Thornbury, we said, hey, we've been here for enough time, let's try something new. And that's when we decided to relocate again to Waterloo. So at that point, we had 2 kids and very excited to be in the great region of Waterloo. We've been here for just about 6 years. And while being in the region of Waterloo, I've worked in a few different industries. So I worked in the environmental engineering industry in human resources, and then most recently started at Axonify about 1.5 years ago. So the reason that I wanted to share my story with you is to share why it's important to understand all the variety of different industries and impacts that it can have. So I understand different perspectives, but what I really do understand is how people are motivated based on different circumstances, based on the type of work environment that they are in, and certainly the economic movement that occurs. As I mentioned, in Calgary, oil was high when I was there, which then means that the needs were very different. So people weren't worried about job security. They were more concerned about their career development. They were more concerned about ladder climbing. When I was at Blue Mountain, a very different perspective. And for some of the people that were there, job security was more important because it was a seasonal nature. So they knew that if something occurred, that it wasn't as easy to find work. For some people, they were just there for a good time. They just wanted to have their season pass. So it was a very different way that we motivated and encouraged the engagement of employees based on what their needs were. At the engineering firm, again, a different population. The focus was more on their status, a lot more focus on their needs of years of experience, and even that focus on retirement. So how to engage a workforce that is in a different stage of life is very different than when you're looking at where I currently am at Axonify, where the stage of career is a little bit different. People are motivated by doing more meaningful work, feeling that they are making a difference, working with great people, believing in their product, and obviously having fun along the way. But how we engaged people in the past, and the past being a month ago, is very different than how we engage people today. We certainly know our new reality is very different, and our employees are dispersed. We know that many people have been temporarily or permanently laid off, and while it may not be the reality of your organization, it impacts your employees because that makes them have some concern about their job security. Perhaps a spouse, a significant other, a parent, even a child has been temporarily laid off. So with that, it can impact them even if it's not occurring in your environment. We know that the financial outlook of the year is very daunting for many organizations. We know that the shift in the work and how work is being done is very different. And that's from everything from your front line, trying to learn some new behaviors in safety, in health, to even just shifting that work environment to being at home, and how do you manage that? That work from home environment, I think, as many of us do, we read about how to work from home in a different way. There's so many articles, webinars, seminars, everything, tips and tricks from everybody under the sun on how to be more efficient at working from home. Everything from your new colleagues, as we like to call them, your children, your roommates, parents, pets that you're trying to work collaboratively with at the same time that they're around you. Seeing friends or not being able to see friends can be very challenging for some people. That new reality can make the work environment very different. And setting up the space that wasn't initially designed to be a workspace can also be very unengaging. Our workplaces generally are ergonomic. They are designed in a way to encourage certain behaviors, whether that be heads down quiet work, whether that's collaboration, but generally our homes are not set up in a way to be productive in a day-to-day work. And then of course there's the technology that goes along with it, and being engaged if your own technology or perhaps your internet access isn't as accessible as when you're in the office. So we know all of these challenges really make it very difficult for people to be engaged, and that change happened so quickly, people weren't able to think ahead and plan for it. I even remember when we were, our HR team was sitting down and we were trying to make some decisions on our next steps. How are we going to move towards a remote workforce? It hadn't been legislated yet by the government, but we knew it was coming and we wanted to get ahead of that curve. And we were sitting there coming up with our next steps plan, and then we got the announcement that the schools were closing. And again, everything shifted for us because we knew that with that shift, that made a big difference to our workforce. A lot of our workforce do have young families, and so we had to again pivot, shift, and be flexible in what that meant for our staff and how we were going to engage them. It was quite an interesting time, as we all know. So what I often think about is the difference of what we're experiencing now than when other experiences and phenomena have happened across Canada, for example. Certainly in my life, there have been many life-changing occurrences, whether it's been in the city, places that I've lived, or in other areas that I hear about. I think, of course, from a work perspective, how those organizations are managing. I think back to things like the floods in Calgary in 2013, the Fort McMurray fires in 2016, Montreal had the ice storms in 98, I believe, 9/11, of course, in 2001. But all of those unforeseeable occurrences really only more or less impacted those that were in those cities. Of course, there were some periphery impacts, but we heard about them. We knew that they were impacting those people, perhaps some organizations outside of those cities, but it was really for those groups of areas or those locations. What's different about right now is that it's impacting all of us, which is great in one way because we have a lot more empathy for each other across the country, especially if you're in an organization that has a workforce across the country or even globally. There's that empathy to understand what everybody is feeling. And so that does encourage that engagement because we can all think about how somebody else is feeling in the circumstance because we're experiencing it as well. So what this all brings together is how do you manage your employees' engagement during this unengaging circumstance? And that's really why we're all here today, is to come up with some realistic approaches, ideas that you can use to engage your staff. And how you engaged your staff in the past probably looks very different than how you're going to engage your staff now. And when I was thinking about this, and it was certainly what we have used at Axonify, is thinking more about what are the needs of our employees. So I'm not a huge model theory person, but this is the one that truly has resonated for me as we've gone through the circumstance. At the beginning of the pandemic, when the business shifts were really just starting to occur, we started looking at strategizing our people philosophy and aligning it with this needs theories. It's been truly our guide ever since, and that's how we've been making our decisions on what we communicate to our staff, how we communicate it, and what is truly important to them, and how do we engage with them based on their needs. So the basic needs theory is in relation to motivation, and it indicates that internal factors will motivate our behavior, and people are motivated by unfulfilled needs. So if you think about that and what our needs were yesterday, being a month ago pre-COVID or 2 months ago, and what our needs are today has significantly shifted. And so engaging our employees based on those needs is more important than ever, because thinking of an engagement tool or an engagement event that doesn't cover a needs isn't going to land well, and it's not going to have the engagement that you were hoping it would overcome. So we've been using Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a very basic principle. I'm sure everybody on the call has heard it, maybe not since you were in university or schooling, but it really has driven a lot of our decisions for engagement. So just as a refresher for those that haven't seen it in a while, this is that hierarchy of needs, and it's described of how our behaviors are motivated based on where you fall on that scale. And all of us are going to fall at a different point depending on our personal circumstances. You may be in a few different buckets at a certain time, but generally you will move through the pyramid based on what needs are being met. And we're going to use this as the model as I go through different ideas to motivate your staff. So as I've mentioned already, the people needs of yesterday are not necessarily the same as today. And of course, every organization is going to be different as to what the needs of your employees are. But when I think back to what were the needs before COVID, or even at the beginning of COVID, and what the needs are of today, that need has drastically changed. So when I think back to before COVID, certainly in our organization, what we focused on in order to motivate and engage our staff were development opportunities, looking at what are the career pathways for our employees. That was very important. What are the progressions in the role? How are people learning? How have you been looking at, maybe for some of you, for your organizations, it's looking at reducing your turnover. Maybe it's looking at how your hiring practices, filling open positions in a tight market. Maybe it's looking at your leaders. For certainly some places, it's ensuring you have the right snacks, and that's making sure you engaged your employees with what was important for them at that time. But we know that at the beginning of COVID, things changed quickly, and really it was within a week. From what I remember, that 1 week changed needs of our employees. Employees were now the daytime caregivers for their children as schools, daycares closed down, as grandparents no longer could be relied on to care for children, as essential business closed their doors, had to relocate the work. And those few weeks, there were a lot of different needs that our employees needed to fulfill. A lot of our employees heard about their spouses losing their jobs, and of course that brings up a different need. So today, how you are motivating and engaging your employees before may not necessarily work for today, because the focus of their needs have changed so drastically. Now, the one thing I do want to make sure, if you take away nothing else from this presentation, the one thing you do take away is The best way that you can engage your employees at any level, regardless of where they are on that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is the benefits and the power of communication. And communication really is the power to engagement. Communication is your best resource. My opinion is it can break down almost all barriers from anything. And when it comes to a circumstance like this, where many of our people are dispersed, communication is your best friend. The right information is important. Communication should support the work. It should not detract from it. Information should be relevant, plain language, and truly what people care about. That will engage them. It will encourage them to read or listen or look at whatever information you are trying to communicate and educate. The right time is very important. Communicating frequently and very quickly, especially right now, is even more important than ever. So getting ahead of your communication, even if you are just communicating that, yes, I've just heard that the schools have closed down, or yes, I have just heard that the schools have opened up again, and saying, we know we are making a decision on this, we will let you know. Sometimes just saying, we know that we've heard that new updated information, we will give you more information within the next day, puts people at ease, and that engages them to make sure that they're listening and ready for that next information. Now, always thinking about the right tool, how you are going to communicate with your staff. There are so many different avenues to communicate. You may have a newsletter, you may be using email, text, messaging programs. We certainly, that rapid communication tool is even more popular now than I think ever, whether you're using Slack, Jabber, Teams, Yammer, there's so many out there. We use Slack at Axonify, and it has been an absolute lifesaver. We used it quite frequently before this, but even now it has really brought people together in a different way. And those rapid communication tools can really help you see what is important to your staff. What you will see is those different channels that are opening up and how people are engaging. So there is some effort that comes with communication and making sure that you're driving the right communication, but you can also see what people are engaged by those different channels and what people truly care about. And you can then build on that. What these rapid communication tools can do is it replaces that water cooler chat. So it allows people to banter, it allows to bring a bit of that fun back in to the environment, and it encourages communication on a daily basis. We actually asked our employees how they want to receive information, and we sent out a survey closer to the beginning of when we were going through significant changes, and said, how do you want to receive information that we know is important? We want to make sure people can see and read about it. So do you prefer email? Do you prefer Slack? Do you prefer us just doing it once a week in a newsletter? And that was important for us to know that we were hitting the right people at the right time, using the avenue that made sense for them. At the end of the day, the majority of our staff said Slack works best for them, so that's what we've certainly been using. There are times where we will double it up and we'll use it a few different avenues if there's a message that we for sure want to make sure that we target everybody. So we'll use 3 different use cases to get that communication and information across. Now, if you are the leader of your organization, there's a lot of considerations to think about on how you are communicating. What I've noticed is that humanizing your communication is really important. So if you are at home and you tend to use video, which I'm always a big supporter of, what I find makes it more interesting and it makes you more human is if your cat jumps on your lap, or your kid or your roommate or somebody else walks behind you, because all of us are experiencing that. That's just our new reality. And if that happens to you, it's funny. It makes it seem for your employees to understand that you're also going through this. So I think it's great when I see those different things that, when I'm on video calls, because we all laugh about it. We think it's fun, and it just allows all of us to realize that we're all living in this chaos together. It's not unique to one person. But again, power of communication is so important during these times. And if there's only one thing that you do and you don't have the capacity to do anything else to engage your employees, make sure you communicate with them. Communicate them as frequently, as plainly, and with the right information that you can. And that will, again, follow all of the different needs in that hierarchy, because communication is how you deliver the engagement tools. So I'll dive into each of the different needs, and we'll talk about what an employee may be feeling with each of these needs, and then we'll talk about how you can engage an employee based on if they are in that scenario. So when we think of the physiological area of the hierarchy, that's your basic needs to survive. Now, when we're bringing this more to a workplace environment, generally, if somebody is concerned and their needs are based on the physiological, they're thinking about, will I be able to pay my bills? Will I be able to pay my rent, my mortgage? Can I feed myself? Can I feed my family? Do I have benefits in order to take care of myself or others if we do get sick? And that's the reality that we're in. And that certainly was one of the biggest needs as shifts happened so quickly, and some of those layoffs were starting to happen out in the community. So thinking about what those needs are and what the mindset of somebody when they're focused on just being able to pay their rent, pay their mortgage, and feed themselves, to engage those staff, you have to shift the focus. So the focus, again, communication is the most important to motivate your employees at this level. You want to engage them through things that are more important, of how do they feed themselves? How can you communicate to them in order to satisfy that need? So communicating to them about how the business is doing, communicating to them about what the job security is, and that may be different and that may change. And that's okay. Initially, it may not look great. It may start to look better, or vice versa. But the more you can communicate and be honest about the reality, that will resonate better than the unknown. People tend to be more fearful of the unknown than if they have something. And whether that something is just communicating that right now we are doing well, but we also realize that that might change. If you communicate what decisions are being made or what decisions you may need to make in the future, that will also help with the needs at this level. And at the end of the day, just being honest and bold about what is truthfully happening. That is very important to communicate for those that may be at this level of their needs. When we move up that scale, we get into safety. And this is your basic health. So the physiological and the safety, they overlap a lot when we're looking at sort of the workplace and when we're looking at our current situation or circumstance. But for employees, what they're probably thinking about right now is, do I have family members that could be at risk? Does my job put me at risk? Will I or my family or friends become infected? Am I mentally healthy? And those are the types of needs that you want to be aware of in order to consider how are you going to engage your employees if these are the true concerns that they have. So if those are the concerns of your employees right now, then stepping up your mental wellness support. Communicating to them what is available to employees. I know that there's many more resources out there now than there were. There were many resources available, but I feel that it has been much more widely communicated what is accessible. If you don't have employees that are on a benefit plan, or you don't have an employee family assistance program that has access to mental wellness support, there are many different options out there that are free service. And so I encourage you to look into that. You're certainly welcome to connect with me, and I can connect you to a few that I'm aware of. But there are a lot of resources available, and even just gathering that information and sharing it with your staff can really benefit them. So one, what it does is that you acknowledge that this could be a concern. It also allows staff to feel engaged because they know that it's okay to be struggling. So mental wellness support is extremely important right now, and coming from the leadership team is important to engage your staff through this pandemic. Something that we've done in the past, and we're going to be launching it within the next week or two, is more of a fun wellness bingo game. So we're adding in some mental wellness aspects. So we ask everybody to go through the bingo game. Sometimes it's, handle a meeting as standing up to help with them moving around. But one of the topics that we're asking them to try and fill out on their bingo card is to log into our EFAP and to sign up for it. So they may or may not use it, but sometimes it just takes that first step to sign up and be aware of what the offering is. So just thinking of different unique options to help encourage your staff to seek out mental wellness support. Another thing to consider is just refreshing and having another look at your sick days policies, your leave policies, and even looking at your bereavement policies. We know that there's possibility that some of these are going to increase, and just making sure that you're getting ahead of that and having a look at that, and then even sharing it with your staff and saying that that sick days could be used more frequently because of exposure. Perhaps it's even taking care of others that are sick. So how are you going to handle that? And by communicating and getting ahead of that, instead of waiting for people to ask you for that, you're engaging them in a different way because you're looking at what is important to them today. Some of the other topics that could fall under that safety level, ergonomic support. We know that many of our workplaces at home aren't set up for a true environment to support your ergonomic well-being. If you have somebody that has any training in ergonomic, then making sure that they are connecting and again communicating to your staff that they can do a virtual assessment, and then looking at ways that you can support them from home. Is there a footstool that you can either drop off, they pick up, maybe they expense it? Is there something for their wrists, for their chair? At Axonify, we offered for everybody to collect their chairs, their monitors, whatever made sense for them, and just relocate their office space to their home. And so that was an extra benefit that we could do to make sure that people were set up as best they could in a home environment. And then certainly that physical well-being is going to help engage your employees. So the awareness that sitting at a desk, if that is the work environment that you're leading. So if your employees are working from home, they're sitting at a desk, everything they're doing is virtual. And it's amazing how those small movements throughout the day when you are in an office or in another workplace can have a big impact on your physical well-being. I consider myself fairly active. I consider myself fairly fit, but I'm even quite struggling with the sitting at home all day. Even just the normal nuances of getting up and moving from meeting to meeting, sitting in a different chair, sitting in a different meeting room, at a different table. Even just the turning around and chatting with somebody, those are all movements that I'm not experiencing as much anymore. And so talking about it and engaging with your staff over that need can have a big impact. There's so many virtual yoga classes out there that are free. I've actually been using the Lululemon one in the morning, and I've been quite impressed with their virtual yoga class. And so maybe it's even just telling your staff, hey, let's all jump on a class on Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. And those that want to join, great. Those that don't, no big deal, but you're just encouraging that physical well-being as well. If you have even internal people that are yoga instructors or exercise instructors, perhaps leveraging their knowledge and asking them to host something virtual. Another idea that some companies have been doing is just having that walking and step challenge, which is just another way to engage and encourage movement with your staff. One thing that many organizations have been encouraging too is updating their statuses. So whatever tool you may use through the computer, updating your status to say where you are at a moment. So it's not about checking in, it's not about keeping tabs on people, but it's allowing people to feel okay to step away from their desk or their workstation, wherever they're actually working. It can be very challenging to step away from your desk and somebody is sending you a Slack or an email, and that sense that you should respond right away, and people might be judging you because you aren't responding right away. So if you encourage people, and then you yourself are doing it as well by updating and saying, going for a walk back at 3 o'clock, or enjoying lunch with the family, or maybe it's doing homeschooling with the kids back at 1 o'clock. You know, whatever it might be, it allows people to feel okay to step away from their desk. And when they see you doing it, it will also encourage them to do it as well. So the belonging stage in the needs hierarchy is probably one of the biggest buckets. So this is the one that when we think of engagement, I think most people will move towards this need. And this is, in general, probably the biggest need in a normal circumstance. So engagement, we look at how do we bring people together? How do we encourage cross-collaboration and allow that engagement to continue to manifest throughout the organization? When we're all physically dispersed, that sense of belonging can really be challenged. I heard recently this pandemic or the circumstance that we're in can really be attributed to the feeling of mourning. So we're often mourning the loss of many things right now. It might be mourning the loss of a vacation plan. And for some of us, that is something we budget for, we plan for, we get excited about, and then it didn't happen. It could be the loss of a milestone. We have many children that are supposed to be graduating from high school or university. Maybe you have friends that are graduating from university, and you're losing that big milestone and the way that you had envisioned having that ritual. So this sense of mourning can be a big impact. And that goes back to a bit of that mental wellness, but it certainly is part of that belonging, because our rituals that we have that are being challenged right now are making our needs different. We have this inability to connect with friends, family, colleagues in the same way. There's many new ways to connect with people, but we have to work at that. It's different. We are a very adaptable species, but we also have to work at it in order to adapt to these new ways of belonging. This disconnection with people, for some individuals, can be really heightened. For some of us, we have many people in the house, and so we're getting that sense of being connected to others. For other people, they're completely alone. So it's not safe for them to visit their elderly parents. It's not safe for them to be connecting with coworkers physically. And so it's even more so this need of belonging and feeling like you're part of something that's important to acknowledge and work towards to encourage that employee engagement. I certainly think that now more so than ever, our personal lives and our work lives are interrelated. There's less of a sense of when your workday starts and your workday ends. I have a 10 and a 12-year-old, and I always tell them when I'm heading off to the office that, I'm heading to work now, and they know that that's the cue, that they're doing their schooling and I'm going off to work, but that those lines are certainly blurrier now, if that's a word, blurrier, than they were before. So when we look at thinking about ways to engage your employees that may be feeling this need of belonging, there's lots of different options out there. And I hear so many interesting out-of-the-box thinking that are mindful of budgets. You know, a lot of our budgets are being not necessarily cut, but we're just being more mindful of how we're spending money right now. And so there's so many interesting ways to encourage that belonging and to engage your employees. A lot of it is creating these new rituals or even virtualizing your existing rituals of what you had already done in the past and keeping your people connected, and you're maintaining that culture. Some of the things, you know, as I was trying to put together what I thought were important was certainly that technology piece can have a big impact on your engagement. If somebody doesn't have great internet connection, it's going to be much harder for them to do a video chat. So they may turn off their video. They can still listen, but you don't get that sense of connection the same way as when you see somebody. So technology can be a big impact, and addressing that. So whether it's launching something different, maybe you launch a different online tool to virtually connect with people. Maybe you look at providing a stipend to enable better internet technology. But technology is a big piece of how to keep your employees engaged, because nothing is worse than feeling that frustration when you know the rest of your team is connected on something and you're really glitchy and you can't access it the same way. Social committee, if you don't have a social committee, and maybe it's, you know, the size of your organization or it's not necessarily part of your culture, but now more than ever, it's establishing a social committee is a great tool, because there are many people that just love to organize. They love to gather people together. They are those, that person that when you go to a gathering, they always have people around them. They're very engaging and they are good at what they do. So utilizing those people to come up with different ideas, to try to gather people together. So if you don't have a social committee already established, maybe look at connecting with people now and asking people to start to think about different social ideas. Connecting with your leaders is very important as well. When we look at our communication, we tend, especially if there's a big decision being made, we tend to start our communication at the executive level. We then filter it down to our leaders to make sure that we have addressed any concerns, additional questions, and then we work down to the bulk of our staff. You might not be big enough in order to have that same cadence, but connecting with your leaders is extremely important, not only because they are leading others, but also because they're going through just as many challenges as the rest of us are. And having those touch points are important, because if they're not engaged, then it's going to be very difficult for them to engage with the employees that are reporting into them. So we've been considering a weekly leader company update or a weekly leader coffee chat where you either are sharing information or you're maybe asking somebody to share information back to the group is a great idea. A lot of teams are having morning coffee chats or maybe even Friday cocktail hours, all virtual. And that's a great way to engage employees for that sense of belonging, like they're part of something important. A big piece of what we are hearing is replacing that water cooler chat. Now, and what that is those conversations that you just hear or maybe you jump into and just organically happen. And when you're virtual, they don't organically happen the same way. So it takes a bit more effort as an organization to think about how you can create those water cooler chats. Again, those rapid communication tools are your best friend in this type of scenario. So coming up with different ways to connect with people. Some of the good ideas that I've heard along the way, and we've even used a few of these, are a work from home confessions group. So you just allow people to poke fun at themselves at what the current situation is. There's nothing better than laughter and joking and just sharing what is the reality of your new your new normal. So that one's been quite fun. We've been using that one, and just hearing people's different scenarios is just great to understand. Parenting is a great one, just allowing your employees to connect with other parents, to share tools, to share resources, to figure out how they're actually managing at home. Pets was actually something that came up at Axonify in the last year, and it is amazing how it took off, which I never would have thought, but people just love their pets. And so sharing pictures of their pets, sharing different nuances, there's so many funny videos going around about all these dogs that are getting over exercised now, and all they want to do is laze around. I have a dog, and she certainly is in that boat where she's tired of all of the walks that we're giving her. But it's just fun for people to connect on a different level and feel that sense of belonging with other people. Really amping up your games and contests. It doesn't have to have a big win. It doesn't have to cost you anything. If you're able to budget for a small gift card, even a local gift card is that much better. People feel really good about being able to support the local community. Some of the ones that I've been hearing about, or we have been using, sharing baby pictures, and then, who is it sort of game. There's a child coloring contest I'd heard about, lots of online games, euchre tournaments or other different tournaments that you can encourage people to do. Sharing pictures of your new colleagues. So, the funny, while you have this great workstation and then you turn around and there's chaos behind you with toys and children and animals and a kitchen that is in chaos, which can be quite fun to see. You can encourage music concerts. I mean, there's often people that have all these great skills outside of the work environment, and asking them to share some of their skills with the rest of the organization, or even asking a talk show can be quite fun. So thinking about ways to encourage the belonging aspect when people are having that need can be really important. We look at esteem. So this is the respect and happiness. So if all of those other needs are met, then this is what an employee may be thinking about now is, am I doing well at my job? Am I achieving what I want? Am I happy? Are others judging me if I don't respond right away? And without that body language, it's very hard for people to tell if others are agreeing with you, so the confidence can really start to deteriorate. Some people are really questioning, what am I missing? I can't get that sense based on reading other people. And so that esteem can really be impacted. So if you get the sense that some of your employees are at this stage, then some ideas to consider. Mental wellness support is certainly always encouraged at any point. But the recognition aspect is important here. So thinking about e-cards, and there's lots of sites out there where you can pay for e-cards. You can also do inexpensive where just using Adobe and making it a form so that you can send it around to a few people to fill it out and then send it to somebody. Still recognizing anniversaries when somebody's been with the company for 6 months or a year or 3 years or whatever it may be. Considering messaging channels in order to encourage that recognition, because you're not able to do it as easily as those thank yous that you always do when you acknowledge when somebody has done a great job. I've heard of some pay it forward concepts, which I think is a great concept. So it's just sharing when you've done something and then you tag somebody else to do something great. And that just really engages employees to think of things outside and thinking of that bigger purpose. If you have the budget for gift cards, people love gift cards, whether it's $5 or $10, it's just that sense of appreciation. And certainly thinking of local organizations for gift cards is a great aspect too. We already talked about updating your messaging tool or your calendar with your status, and that just helps people understand where things are at so that they don't have that esteem of, or that self-esteem of feeling judged if they do truly step away from their desk and take time for themselves. Encouraging cross-functional knowledge and sharing can be important at this stage. So allowing people to learn from others, encouraging people to connect is a great aspect to help engage employees. And then if we go to the top of the pyramid, the self-actualization, this is that bigger picture. That's that self-purpose, the morals, the acceptance. Employees' needs at this stage are, am I growing in my career? How will the circumstance limit my possibilities for further advancement? So some people may have seen their year that they were going to be moving into a leadership role, or maybe they were going to move into a senior role. And now they're more concerned that that option may not be available to them. So if you have employees that are at this stage, then their needs are going to be different. And there are ways to help engage staff at this level. You can bring in some virtual guest speakers so that they're feeling like they are still developing and growing in their role. You can certainly leverage internal resources. Your internal resources can have great knowledge sharing. You can host learning opportunities. You probably have some gurus that are excellent in Excel, or being great presenters, or everything you wanted to know about Slack or another tool, and just leveraging those internal resources to help share that knowledge across the organization. Mentorship programs is an option. If you don't already have one in place, you could start to connect different people together and allow people to feel that leadership through a mentorship program. Encouraging external online learning and education. For some staff, their workload might be a bit lighter. For some staff, it might be more. So being mindful of encouraging that and allowing people to join networking groups, allowing people to connect through webinars, maybe asking them to share the information back can be really supportive. And then even supporting volunteer or community outreach initiatives. And, obviously with distancing, it's a bit trickier to be volunteering in the same way that we have in the past, but hosting virtual options and asking employees to donate might be a great way to satisfy and engage employees that are at this self-actualization level. So looking at bringing it all together, what you really want to be doing to encourage and engage with your employees is considering the current needs. Trying to encourage people to do online learning when really what they're more concerned about is feeding their family probably is going to be disconnected. So really understanding what the needs of your team are. And again, individuals are going to be different, and that's going to shift. But starting to focus your engagement activities based on what the needs are can help motivate them. And just remembering that people do have different needs at different times, and that is going to shift as we continue to shift through this pandemic. So that concludes what I had hoped, and I've been able to do it in my 1 hour time frame. So I appreciate everybody joining the seminar today. I hope I've given you a few different ideas, even if it's just one idea that you can take away and enable some more engagement with your staff as things shift and move. But I'm certainly open to questions. You can either connect through the chat, or you can reach out to me separately.
Thank you so much, Sheila. So like Sheila said, please, if you have any questions, please type them into the question box. We do have one question that's come in. And so maybe just to get your thoughts, if a business isn't really doing these things and they're interested in doing these things, but they really don't know where to start, where would you suggest to start? Is it reaching out to your employees to see what they want? Are there some kind of fairly easy, low or no cost things that companies can implement fairly quickly that would have a high impact?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my thoughts on that is, if there isn't a lot that's happening right now or hasn't happened in the past, then asking your staff what is important to them right now, And then taking some of that. So you can send a survey out. You can, I think there's a few inexpensive or free survey sites that you can use to send a survey out, and you can anonymously get feedback back. So it can be asking them, you know, how are you feeling right now? What are you concerned about? What can we do to help increase your engagement? So you can even start to think about, if you look at the Maslow and use that as your guide, as you're thinking about your questions. So it might be starting with questions that focus on those physiological needs, and then sort of going up and just thinking of 1 or 2 questions at most. People tend to not fill out surveys if it's going to take them longer than 3 minutes. But I would suggest asking your staff what they are looking for. What are they concerned about right now? And then you target your engagement initiatives based on that. So what you might hear is they're super uncomfortable. So then start to think about ergonomics. Maybe they're really concerned about how their work hours are impacting how they care for their children. So then maybe you initiate a more flexible work environment. But listening to what they're telling you first should drive you in the right direction of what would make sense.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We've gotten a few comments. One saying, thank you so much, that was helpful. Another one saying, really practical, good information. The hierarchy of needs framework was a really useful way to validate the various strategies that they've already been implementing. So that was really helpful to this particular person.
That's great.
So if there are any other questions, feel free to type them in. I don't see any other right now. So we will wrap up and give people a couple more minutes back in their day. Sheila, I really want to thank you for taking the time to share your expertise with us. This is all really great information that could be really helpful to businesses as they're trying to manage their employees through this time. To our attendees, as I mentioned, you will be getting a follow-up email with a link to this webinar recording, so please look for that. We have a number of upcoming webinars scheduled, so please check out the Chamber website for more information on those webinars. And again, I would like to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.